Monday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock. Time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a great weekend. Keeps getting closer and closer, does Browns training camp. The first official workout will be a week from this Saturday, July 22nd. Down in West Virginia. Rookies report earlier than that, veterans a couple days later, so things getting closer and closer. DeAndre Hopkins still out there as a free agent. We know the Patriots and Titans are interested. Jake Trotter, ESPN Browns beat reporter on ESPN 850 Cleveland, talking about any interest at all between the Browns and DeAndre Hopkins.
If Hopkins' market completely dries up, and he wants to come to Cleveland for $4 million on a one-year deal, the Browns will do that. If Deshaun Watson goes to Jimmy Haslam between now and the start of training camp and says, and bangs his hand on the table and says, this is my guy, I want you to sign him, then I don't know what's going to happen. But short of that, the Browns like their receiving core. They like Elijah Moore. They feel good about what they have, and this is not something that they have ever been interested in.
With that, let's welcome in Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dawgs podcast, as well as Network 216. And I think you can throw Dalvin Cook in that conversation, too. Again, if Hopkins comes and says, I want to play here and I want to play here for, $3-4 million, they'll probably do that. But Hopkins isn't doing that, nor is Dalvin Cook.
Exactly, Dave. I mean, it would be fantastic to have DeAndre Hopkins on the Browns roster, having that previous chemistry with Deshaun Watson. You saw the best year statistically for DeAndre Hopkins with Deshaun Watson as his quarterback. I mean, truly, it would be a match made in heaven if you're looking at from just one of the best wide receiver quarterback duos in the NFL with Hopkins and Watson. But the Browns, you bring in Elijah Moore. You traded significant draft capital to bring him to the Browns. You draft Cedric Tillman in the third round. You still have David Bell, who's a former third-round pick. You have Donovan Peoples-Jones, who the Browns really like, even though his future with the team beyond this season is iffy with his contract. And, of course, you have Amari Cooper. You have so many players that the Browns have at wide receiver. Oh, and they signed Marquise Goodwin. So, obviously, Hopkins, his level is above pretty much all of those guys except maybe Amari Cooper. But at this point, why would DeAndre Hopkins take that less of money when you can go to the Patriots or go to the Titans and make probably $10 to $15 million, close to what Odell Beckham Jr. might have gotten, what he got with the Ravens? So Hopkins, again, unless he's willing to take a lot less, kind of like Jake Trotter said, I don't see him coming to the Browns either, even though he would be a lot of fun having him back with Deshaun Watson. But then you bring in Dalvin Cook, and I've seen it suggested that the Browns should look to add Dalvin Cook because he can play that Kareem Hunt type of role. While I'm not against that, the issue with Kareem Hunt is the Browns wanted to move on from paying a backup running back $5 million. So you think Dalvin Cook's going to come in and play for $3 million, $2.5 million? I don't see it, especially with him being 27 years old, when he can go to Miami or he can go to the Jets. That's another team that's been rumored to have interest. And he can go to one of those teams, make a little bit more money than that, and probably be a starter. So, again, it would be awesome to add those two, let alone one of them. But financially, it just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't seem like what the Browns want to do. Because, again, if you wanted to do that, some could say you could just bring Kareem Hunt back, even though his play really tailed off at the end of last season. But the Browns don't want to pay a running back anywhere near $5 million again.
Yeah, and Cook wants in the neighborhood of 10, 11, which is what he was set to make with the Vikings before he was cut. Again, leading up to training camp, between mini camp and training camp, it's called Crazy Talk time. Along those lines, as trade rumors swirl around Rams defensive tackle Aaron Donald, Browns are in position to pounce. Probably everybody in the NFL is in position to pounce, but the cap and the cost it would cost to bring in Aaron Donald make it really unlikely for the Browns to do something like that. Really unlikely.
Exactly. And I see people saying that his base salary for this season is going to be $13.5 million. 2024, that's going to be $10 million. But then if you look at the rest of the contract, it mentions that his cap hit, though, is going to be around $34 million, and possibly then you're looking at $26 million this year. So whether that's the Rams or the Browns taking that, the Browns would have a hard time Like, you could probably make it work for 1 year, but then that becomes a problem because in 2024, the Browns are already $59 million at this point over the salary cap. I mean, it would be awesome to add Aaron Donald. Who wouldn't want to add arguably one of the best defensive players in the entire NFL? You could make the argument he's still the best defensive player in the NFL. It's just so hard to make that work money-wise for the Browns because not only do you have to pay him this year, and again, you could find a way to make it work this year. That I don't disagree with. But then it's 2024. That becomes a huge problem. And you already have decisions to make on Amari Cooper and his $20 million cap hit. Donovan Peoples-Jones, are you willing to give him double-digit millions to keep him in Cleveland? You have the most players signed for $10 million or more than any other team in the NFL. So I don't know how they could make that work past this year. And because then even if you do have to cut Aaron Donald, I mean, the dead cap for 2024 that it would be potentially, you're looking at $33.5 million. So again, like you said, everyone in the NFL is interested in Aaron Donald. That's no secret. The problem is, I don't know how the Browns make it work cap-wise. I'm not a capologist to even try and remotely figure that out. But when you just look at his contract and what he's due, I just don't see how it's possible to have him pass even this year.
Yeah, even when you restructure, eventually you run up against it where the restructuring counts against you. So it will catch up. They'll just keep pushing it down the road, and you find out, okay, this guy really isn't playing at the level that we'd hoped he would, and those are the guys you move on from. All right, along those lines, Bleacher Report. Roster holes the Browns must fill before training camp. They say defensive tackle is one of them. In order for the Browns' D-line to be elite, they need another clear starting caliber player to fill defensive tackle hole next to Tomlinson. Plenty of depth at the position, but they could still use one final boost. I can't argue with that thought, but if you go through every roster, you could find a position or two where you can say that exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I've said for a while, and I've seen a lot of people agree too, that they believe the Browns need to add one more defensive tackle. And I still do agree with that. But at the same time, it seems to be Jim Schwartz is pretty content with the group he has. And when you have Dalvin Tomlinson, who you paid a good amount of money to anchor that defensive tackle room, you brought in Siaki Ika, who Jim Schwartz was really happy about being able to add as one of the guys he wanted to add. Then you have Maurice Hurst, who so far has looked pretty good this offseason. Obviously, health with him is the biggest question mark still. And then you have Tristan Hill, not to mention still to have Jordan Elliott, Tommy Togiai. I don't know what some of the futures for them look like, but, you know, it's still a huge upgrade from what they had last year. You bring in Zadarius Smith, who can play inside. Myles Garrett can play inside. Alex Wright can play inside, and I believe will play more inside. The Browns have a lot more depth on the defensive line than we had last year. You know, again, we would love to see them go add more players, bring in more depth. But at the same time, they've added a ton of depth already to the defensive line. If they add someone else, great. If not, it's kind of hard to be upset about that because, again, they've added so much talent. And you, at some point, you know, Andrew Berry might say, unless there's an injury, we might not add anyone else. And I think we have to kind of make peace with that because he's done a lot. This defense has a ton of talent added to it now. It's just time to deliver. And I think bearing an injury from training camp or something along those lines, they might be done adding to the defensive tackle room, unless, of course, after the 53-man roster cuts are done, if there's a veteran that ends up getting cut that the Browns potentially could sign for a cheap deal that would bring more leadership to the position, I think they would look at that.
I would agree. And the other thing I would say is Jim Schwartz is going to piece it together so that let's see how he works with the depth that he has. It's going to be very different than what Joe Woods would have done. Two more before we go to break. They say veteran linebacker is another one. By adding one more experienced linebacker to the roster, Cleveland would be bolstering the group, providing some much-needed insurance. Injuries, underperformance can't be predicted. And if either happens to one or more, the team may not have a way to solve those issues. They also say backup running back. Chubb should have a great 2023 season. 27-year-old proved he's capable of being bell cow back in Cleveland. It doesn't change the fact that there's not a ton of options to serve as its number two back, which is an important role for the offense. Again, I can't argue with any of that. I don't think they're bringing in a veteran linebacker or a veteran running back until the big cut down. Remember, everybody's getting cut at once, so there will literally be 900 free agents available. That's when you may see a defensive tackle, linebacker, or running back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no reason. Again, bearing an injury that you have early in training camp, there's no real reason to go out and add another veteran at defensive tackle or linebacker specifically because, like you mentioned, with the cuts all being at once, there's going to be so many players that are going to be available at the exact same time. And if there's someone the Browns really want, they can wait. There's no reason that they got to go out and panic and sign someone just because they want to add another body to the position. There's no need to do that because someone they could potentially be interested in could get cut and they could sign them on a cheap one-year deal. That's exactly what I think Andrew Berry would prefer to do, and that really makes the most sense. I saw some Browns fans mention the idea of Myles Jack. I know he's 28 years old. He does really well tackling, but one thing the Browns are big on, of course, when you look at player evaluations, analytics plays a part into this, and I think Pro Football Focus does for them as well. He's graded one of the most poor linebackers on Pro Football Focus, and if Pittsburgh doesn't keep you, and Pittsburgh known for producing some pretty good linebackers and investing at the talent with players that are very solid, they didn't bring back Myles Jack for a reason, and they traded for Myles Jack. So that concerns me a little bit with him. And then you look at backup running back, it seems to me that the Browns are very content with Jerome Ford, and unless something changes with that, like they see him in training camp and like, maybe this guy isn't cut out to be the backup this year, then they look to add a running back during training camp. But one scenario I wouldn't rule out, the Falcons moving on from Cordell Patterson. I mentioned this before. The Falcons moving on from Cordell Patterson and cutting him would save them about, I believe, $2.5 million in cap space, and they did draft Bijan Robinson. They have Tyler Algeria as a backup running back, so they got some young running backs there. Cordell Patterson is going to want to play a little bit of a bigger role, and I think the Browns could give him that, especially on third down, being that pass-catching back that Kareem Hunt was. So just something to keep in mind for a potential roster cut, because I do think he is going to get cut. He is a little bit on the older side, but if the Browns can sign him on a cheap one-year contract, that would make a lot of sense.
I agree with you. Tyler Johnson and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns here on Sports for CLE with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dawgs podcast, as well as Network 216. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, love the show. Longtime viewer, often caller. It's Truck and Brian calling from the Mansfield, Columbus area. Just have a question. Do you think the Browns are going to be players for Myles Jack since he's a free agent, or do you think they're really satisfied with their linebacking corps? Just like to hear your guys' thoughts. Go Browns. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Tyler, we touched on it a little bit. There's also nobody's rushing out to sign Myles Jack, which, again, tells you something. So I think what they're doing is they're evaluating, all right, who might be available. The teams have an idea of who's going to be available once the cut down to 53 comes. Andrew Berry's sharp enough. There may be somebody that he thinks is a better fit for what they're doing. It might be somebody that's from Jim Schwartz's past. So there isn't a hurry to go out and sign anybody. And, you know, they have a whole pro personnel scouting department with their eyes on who might be available come that 53-man roster cut down.
Yeah, exactly. Like we talked about, don't go out and make a panic signing. If they feel they need to add another veteran, they can go out and do that. But you can do that whenever. And I do think once the rosters are cut down, that is when they look to explore that option. And I do think there's a possibility, too, that even once the preseason's over and the Browns name their 53-man roster, if they feel that someone is a better fit than who they have currently on the roster, they could end up still cutting that particular player and adding a veteran to that position. Because if you look at the market right now, you have Myles Jack. Clearly, he's not signed. A guy they potentially could look to bring back is Deion Jones. Just if he stays on the market, maybe he takes a cheap one-year contract. He wasn't awful with the Browns. He wasn't great, but he would be another veteran they could look at. I know Kyle Van Noy has been mentioned in the past because the Browns have had previous interest in him, but those guys are still available, and there's a reason why they're still available too. I mean, some of these teams might not sign any of these guys because, like you said, they're going to wait till all these roster cuts. Why go out and sign one of these guys now when someone better could be available, and that player could even potentially be on a one-year contract, which the Browns can get some of these veterans on one-year contracts after being cut. These guys aren't going to necessarily probably be looking for a lot of money. They're looking for a team for a season to try and maybe build back some value to enter free agency. And I think that could play right into the Browns' favor, right into Andrew Berry's favor. And I think that's the smartest move moving forward. That way, again, no panic signing. Wait till the roster cuts are done. Andrew Berry and Jim Schwartz really evaluate what the needs are in the defense. Are there any other positions they can look to really add another player or two, and then have your roster set for the rest of the season?
Yeah, and again, Myles Jack and Kyle Van Noy, they may sign with somebody and then be cut and available again. But they're targeting specific areas of need, and clearly, if they thought one of these guys would make them better, they'd have already signed them. That's why I just don't see it happening this close to training camp. Off-season report cards for all 32 NFL teams. This is from Yahoo Sports. They grade the Browns a C, which I find interesting. Juan Thornhill comes over as a free agent, brings winning pedigree Cleveland needs. Selecting a couple of linemen from Ohio State in the draft will please the locals and should help the offensive line that needs work. Okay. Also choosing Dorian Thompson-Robinson in the 5th round was peculiar when you spent what you did on your current quarterback. All right, so in the rationale portion of that, he's a rookie and a 5th-round pick. You need a developmental quarterback. They clearly liked him. As far as the offensive line needing help, maybe depth, but both of those guys were pretty good picks, and they haven't been guys that have gone out and drafted Ohio State Buckeyes, so I don't think that fits into it. And the other thing is, what did you want them to do in the offseason? They needed a wide receiver. They got 2. They got a 3rd-round pick, and they got a young wide receiver, Elijah Moore. They needed defensive line help, and they went out and got a whole bunch of it. I'm not sure how you grade them a C. I just don't get that.
No, listen, I don't either. When I hear this, I think to myself, you bring in Juan Thornhill, okay, and that's great. The Browns traded for an All-Pro in Zadarius Smith. Does that just automatically get forgotten? You traded for him and gave up absolutely nothing to get him. So you don't mention that. You mentioned the Ohio State lineman, and again, the Browns haven't been known to draft Buckeyes since really Denzel Ward, I believe. And outside of that, you drafted Dawand Jones in the 4th round when he wasn't projected to be there. Some thought he was even a late 1st, early 2nd-round pick. You get Luke Whippler, some believe is the 2nd-best center in the draft in the 6th round. And then regarding Dorian Thompson-Robinson, you have Josh Dobbs on a 1-year, $2 million contract. That's it. You bring in Dorian Thompson-Robinson because you could have him for the next 4 years, pay him around $500,000 to be your backup quarterback for the next couple of years. And that's going to help with paying Deshaun Watson as much money as they are. So when I see this grade too, it kind of makes me laugh because they're not mentioning Zadarius Smith, which is one of the biggest acquisitions for any team in the NFL. Forget just the Browns. You're adding an all-pro defensive end that's consistently been one of the top edge rushers in the NFL. And they don't even mention Elijah Moore, who I still think is going to have a breakout season this year and lead the Browns in receptions, not necessarily yardage, but receptions, because he's going to be that security blanket for Deshaun Watson and never had the talented quarterback around him that he's going to have now. You forget 2 of the Browns' biggest moves, and you grade them a C. So, yeah, that to me, I have to admit, I don't understand it whatsoever. But you know what? I also look at that, and I hope the players see that and they use that fuel as motivation. I love things like that because that's what we call bulletin board material.
Yeah, it's almost like you pick certain things to get to the grade you wanted to get to, and that's what they did. So, it's neither here nor there, but I see it's like, okay. This from Dog Pound Daily. 3 former draft picks the Browns wish they could bring back. Number 3, Larry Ogunjobi. Okay, I can see that one. Number 2, Christian Kirksey, a linebacker. He's from 2014. That's getting a little on the aged side. And number 1, they go Rashard Higgins, and I don't see that one at all. I loved Rashard Higgins. He'd have a real tough time making this wide receiver room. That they're so deep at wide receiver right now. So I could see Ogunjobi. That might be one of your experienced DTs. But the other ones, I'll pass.
That's kind of how I am too. Nothing against the guys mentioned. I loved Christian Kirksey when he was here. He was really one of the leaders of the Browns defense at the time. Larry Ogunjobi, it's all right. I mean, he's not been special since leaving the Browns. I mean, he's had some decent seasons, I would say, but nothing really stands out. I mean, in 2021, he had 8 sacks, but he's still graded out as one of the worst defensive tackles against the run. And his overall pass rush grade wasn't even real. I mean, it was just barely average. So you're not missing much there. And then Rashard Higgins, love Hollywood Higgins. I still have a Hollywood Higgins shirt, but that's just sentimental at that point. He was fun. The red carpet celebration is still one of the best celebrations in NFL history. I'll never forget that. But other than that, yeah, the 3 guys mentioned, I can't really make an argument that any of them on the roster, that they would really make it besides Larry Ogunjobi. And even then, he's maybe a rotational guy at best, I think, here.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs Podcast Network 216 and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, some high praise for Myles Garrett. We'll tell you what that is. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs Podcast as well as Network 216. Pro Football Focus's Brad Spielberger, who, programming note, will be on the show a little bit later this week, talking on NFL Network's Total Access, how good he thinks Myles Garrett will be this season.
Yeah, over the last 2 seasons, Myles Garrett leads us in pass rush win rate by almost a full 3 percentage points at 22.5. He is second in sacks over that span with 32. You bring in Jim Schwartz, a defensive coordinator that loves to bring the heat. You add Zadarius Smith, add Dalvin Tomlinson. Myles Garrett is going to break the single-season sack record with at least 23 in 2023.
I like the Browns personnel. I like what they're doing, Jim Schwartz coming over. But I don't know if they're going to have enough leads to allow him to chase the quarterback.
Tyler, Jim Schwartz has said he's taken the seatbelts off. So I think, and that's one of the things that, we were talking about defensive tackles. I don't think people are accounting enough for the style of play, the mentality and the identity this defense is going to have. Jim Schwartz's defenses get after it.
Yeah, and like they mentioned, Myles Garrett has never had this much talent around him. Truly. He's Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, huge additions. You still have Ogbo Okwonkwo. You bring him in as a rotational guy now. Isaiah McGuire, Alex Wright, Siaki Ika. There's a ton of talent now on this defensive line that Myles Garrett has never had around him. The most talent Myles Garrett's had around him is Jadeveon Clowney on the other side of him. That's it. Now he has a lot more talent. And what that's going to do, offensive lines can no longer double and triple team Myles Garrett. They're just not going to be able to do it unless you just want Zadarius Smith to get 15 sacks. That's the choice you're making. And Myles Garrett to break the all-time sack record, it's not crazy. Everyone thinks it's crazy. It's really not, especially bringing in Jim Schwartz, like they said. You bring in Zadarius Smith to play opposite, Dalvin Tomlinson to play inside. Myles Garrett is one of the most talented pass rushers that the NFL has. And really, you could make the argument, and he is the most talented pass rusher the Browns have ever had in their history. And he's only continuing to get better. We forget that he's only going to be 28 years old, and he's already the Browns' leader all time in sacks. So, hey, if he can break that record, it would be absolutely incredible. But I do have to say, I think the Browns will have enough leads to where Myles Garrett will be able to just pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. So I do have to disagree with Brad's partner on that one. But, yeah, looking forward to Myles Garrett having a huge season with Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I agree. And they shored up the rushing defense so you won't be able to just run the ball down their throat. That's why they signed Dalvin Tomlinson. That's why they drafted Siaka Ika. Along those lines, this is from CBS Sports. Identifying the best position groups around the league. Best pass rushers, they go with the Browns. A combo of Garrett, Smith is lethal. They also have combined 7 different 12-sack seasons, and Okoronkwo is underrated up-and-comer after arriving from the Texans. So let's go back to that off-season thing they were talking about where they graded him a C. The Browns' edge rushers were not good last year. They are ranked among the best in the league, and that's because of the off-season additions.
Exactly. That ranking is still hilarious for that reason, because when you bring in a guy like Zadarius Smith, who any team in the NFL would have wanted to add Zadarius Smith, and the Browns did it. Andrew Berry did it without giving up basically anything for him besides some more guaranteed money. That's about it. You bring in Ogbo Okoronkwo, who is one of the most underrated pass rushers in the NFL, and being with the Texans really never got that recognition as other pass rushers could have gotten. He's now going to be a rotational guy with the Browns after we thought he was coming here to be a starter. You're going to rotate those 3 together. You're going to play all 3 of them together. You're going to bring in Isaiah McGuire from time to time. You're going to still have Dalvin Tomlinson, Siaka Ika. Seeing CBS Sports say that, the fact that the Browns are that high, it's kind of hard to think out there in the NFL whose group is actually more talented and more proven than what the Browns have at defensive end. And I can't think of a group. I mean, you think of the 49ers, but they got Nick Bosa. Outside of Nick Bosa at defensive end, they've lost some talent over there. They have great defensive tackles, but we're talking specifically pass rushers. And I don't know anyone in the NFL that is higher than the Browns right now. And they're going to have a big year this year. And we've talked about many times, Myles Garrett's never had this much talent, but Zadarius Smith also hasn't either. And it's going to be a really fun season. And it's really unfortunate that we're still about 2 weeks away from training camp kicking off.
All right, this one from the Bleacher Report, predicting every NFL team's biggest bust of the 2023 season. They say Donovan Peoples-Jones. Truth is, DPJ saw 96 targets because the next receiver in line was rookie David Bell. Expect Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman to both take up important roles, while Peoples-Jones becomes a bit more obscure within the offense. It's hard to call a guy that has had his production as a 6th-round pick a bust. Now, the thing they're not taking into account, the Browns are going to throw the ball more than they did a season ago. But he probably is going to get a few less targets. But that's okay. If he's productive in a few less targets, he's not a bust.
Exactly. I don't know. Calling Donovan Peoples-Jones or suggesting that he's a bust, I mean, come on. Like, 6th-round picks that are in the NFL at this point still, let alone their starters, that just doesn't happen very often. It's very rare. So, I mean, I get what they're saying. I don't expect him to get 100 targets because you're bringing Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman. But one thing we do know, we don't know how big of a role Cedric Tillman's going to play. I do think he is going to get snaps, but he's not going to be a starter this year. And so Donovan Peoples-Jones is still going to be a starter. I think Elijah Moore is going to be a starter as well, because I think they're going to start with a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. But it doesn't take into account, like you mentioned, they're going to throw a lot more than they did last year. and more than they have during Kevin Stefanski's tenure as Browns head coach. So, I mean, I don't see him getting that many targets necessarily, but I think what's going to happen, he's going to have less receptions, maybe a little less yardage, but I think those touchdown numbers are going to go up. He had 3 last year. I think he gets closer to 5 or 6 this year. And I think his average, which was 13.8 last year, could be closer to about 15 as an average. So I think some numbers are going to go down, other numbers are going to go up. But yeah, calling him a bust, that's hilarious.
No, he's a productive NFL wide receiver and a starting quality wide receiver. All right, before I let you go, this is from Game Day NFL. The most expensive wide receiver rooms in 2023. Broncos are the most expensive, $43 million. Raiders and Buccaneers also at $43 million, but a little less. Jaguars at $42 million. They have the Dolphins and the Browns at $39 million. When you think about that, if they're at $39 million, that means over half of their spending on the wide receiving core is in the person of Amari Cooper. Now, he's a really good wide receiver, but that's the reason people aren't so sure he's going to be around in 2024.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason that the Browns have a very tough decision to make on Amari Cooper, because he is taking so much money at the position. And what you have to ask yourself is, Amari Cooper is going to be 30, 31 by 2024. Do you want to pay Amari Cooper $20 million, or do you want to save that $20 million and potentially go out and get a guy that could reach free agency like T. Higgins and pay him that money? That's what you kind of have to ask yourself and think, can you get a guy like that, a younger, potentially number 1 wide receiver? Because unfortunately, I don't think Donovan Peoples-Jones is that guy unless he takes a massive step forward that we haven't seen yet. That's going to be the big question with Amari Cooper. I love Amari Cooper, I do. But when he gets to be that age, is that money worth it at that point for the Browns when you can go get younger at the position and maybe even more talented at the position? So one of the big questions that they have to answer at the end of this season.
Yeah, and they could, they could end up extending him, giving him a signing bonus and trying to spread it out. But a lot of it's going to depend how he develops with Deshaun Watson. If that becomes a feared duo, they'll find a way to make that work contract-wise for Amari Cooper. Tyler, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
Yep, anytime, Dave. Thank you.
Tyler Johnson, make sure you check him out, Faithful Dogs podcast, as well as Network 216. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, straight ahead. Sports4CLE, you'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams, I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns here on Sports for CLE. This one from Dog Pound Daily. 5 certified building blocks for the Browns in 2023. Number 1, they go with Myles Garrett, edge rusher. Hard to argue with that. Number 2, Deshaun Watson, the quarterback. Number 3, former first-round pick, 4th overall, Denzel Ward. Number 4, recently acquired wide receiver Elijah Moore. They admit there's a bit of projection happening there, and that's fair. And number 5, they go with Martin Emerson, a 3rd-round pick from a season ago. Let's welcome in Tim Bielik, cleveland.com, as well as the Plain Dealer. Tim, first 3 you can't argue with. Those guys have done it and have had success in the NFL. I understand where they're going with Moore and Emerson and tend to agree. But you got to see some production. If you get production specifically from those 2, should be a really good year for the Browns.
Yeah, definitely. And when you talk about Elijah Moore, there is a lot of projection there. You know, I've talked before about, how his, quarterback play with the Jets obviously was not very good his first 2 seasons in the NFL. And that contributed in part to why he didn't put up the kind of numbers everybody expected him to have at all that he did at Ole Miss coming to the NFL, considering the athletic package he's working with. Now you bring him into Cleveland. Yeah, he's not going to be number 1 or number 2 receiver possibly, but it's a clear upgrade in quarterback going from Zach Wilson to Deshaun Watson. I don't think anybody can doubt that upgrade. Then Martin Emerson, obviously, it's rare to see a 3rd-round pick step up and be that impactful right away. I mean, this is a guy that, I thought, was going to need some time to learn. He was forced into action pretty quickly, and he really played extremely well. And he's got the size to really complement Denzel Ward. Denzel's got, the quickness to handle the shorter, quicker receivers, and Martin Emerson can handle the taller receivers, as we saw him do against Mike Evans of the Buccaneers last season. So certainly those 2 guys still have some work to do to really prove themselves as consistent, productive players, but you can understand the reasoning why those 2 got, selected behind Garrett, Watson, and Ward, who all have been very productive in the NFL and still are on the right side of 30, which means they still got plenty of years of good production left, you would think.
The other thing that shows you is just the value of running backs, because Nick Chubb is among the best running backs in the NFL, but that position has it's been devalued without question.
Yeah, I mean, how many teams do you see have, that true workhorse running back? I mean, the Titans and the Colts are among those 2 teams with Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor, and you can understand why. But even in Cleveland, as good as Nick Chubb is, throughout his career, they've made an effort to have a number 2 back who could take some of the wear and tear off Nick Chubb and extend his career. Seems like that's going to be Jerome Ford this year. How well he does, we're going to have to wait and see till those games come up to see if he's an adequate number 2. But, certainly put a lot of good things out there in the preseason and in, kick return duty to show he has some potential there.
All right, this is from ESPN. Top 10 edge rushers in the NFL. They go number 1, Nick Bosa. Number 2, Myles Garrett. You see highest ranking 1, lowest ranking 4. Last year was 2nd. 27 years old. NFL executive on Garrett. Probably should be 1st every year. He's just not as consistent as some others on the list, but he is the best singular talent. NFL personnel evaluator. Might be the most imposing defensive player at any position. Ability to take over a game is unique. Now, also in the receiving votes, this was the list, was Zadarius Smith. The Raiders, Eagles, Browns, and Chargers were the only teams in the NFL that had 2 players who received votes. Relative to him being number 2, he hadn't been able to finish a season healthy. And that's, one year it was the suspension, another year it was COVID. Last year he was banged up after the car accident. So he's missed time. I think if he ever stays on the field for an entire season, he sets some records and becomes Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting into his physical prime as well. I mean, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. He was a 2027 draft pick, and he doesn't turn 28 years old until the end of December. So that tells you there's still a lot of, there's potential for Myles Garrett to still have a lot of great years of production. I think you mentioned the injuries. That's a big thing that's kind of hurt him. And what I think, has kind of hurt him as well in comparison to Nick Bosa, who when I say this, I'm not trying to downgrade the fact that, Nick Bosa deserved to win Defensive Player of the Year last year. I mean, you put up 18.5 sacks in a season. That's outstanding. But you look at who he has to play with on that defense. I mean, you go down that depth chart, there is stud after stud after stud. Eric Armstead, Fred Warner's behind him. Drake Greenlaw's behind him at linebacker. Talanoa Hufanga had a breakout season at safety last year for the 49ers. You look at the Browns depth chart, Myles Garrett was basically doing it all by himself last year. I mean, he was far and away number one on the team in sacks, really just had no help around him at all last season. You would imagine with Zadarius Smith coming in, with Obo Okoronkwo coming in, with the selection of Isaiah McGuire, probably to a far lesser degree than Smith and Okoronkwo will have an impact. Bringing in Jim Schwartz, who has that mentality of, creating a pass rush with that front four. There's all sorts of things that should make it easier on Myles Garrett to be able to put up big numbers. Obviously, staying healthy has got to be the number one thing, but now he's got help. And now he's got a coordinator who has a proven track record of creating a tremendous pass rush. So no reason he shouldn't be number one either next offseason or in 2025, when we're going forward. But still, plenty of good years with Garrett. And Zadarius Smith, you talked about it, probably the best teammate Myles Garrett's ever played with at defensive end.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see how Jim Schwartz sets them up to have success. Tim Bielik from cleveland.com, Plain Dealer, and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, NFL head coaching rankings. Some interesting rankings here. We'll tell you where Kevin Stefanski falls in this ranking. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. This from the Last Word on Sports, NFL head coaching rankings. Tier 1 Hall of Fame tier, they go Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, Kyle Shanahan. Down at tier number 4, which is coaching purgatory, 21 Arthur Smith, head coach of the Falcons. 22 is Kevin Stefanski, Mike McCarthy, 23, Ron Rivera, 24. The rationale from a scheme perspective, Kevin Stefanski might just be the most boring head coach in the NFL. Perhaps he'll get more creative with a less rusty Deshaun Watson, but I'm not holding my breath. Tim, I can't argue necessarily with the rankings. He's about 500, a couple games over 500. But if you're downgrading him on his offense, Baker Mayfield had a hugely productive year. Jacoby Brissett had a hugely productive year. His offense has been pretty darn good. If you want to question some of the in-game stuff, that's fine. His offensive scheme has been productive. That's not something you can question. That's silly.
Yeah, he's gotten the most out of the quarterbacks he's had, for his past couple of seasons as head coach. You can only do so much with what you have. You can't just turn Jacoby Brissett into Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't work that way. Some guys are just naturally just more talented than others. And you would imagine with Deshaun Watson, obviously the most talented quarterback he's ever had. And I'm talking about Kevin Stefanski, of course. You would imagine that the offense should be really good, but you said it. I don't see what makes Kevin Stefanski's scheme boring. I think it's just, they haven't had the kind of talent to throw the ball around the park like you see the Chiefs and the Bengals and the Bills and some of these other elite teams do. Now they do on paper, obviously, with Watson and the additions they made at receiver. And as far as, why they struggled last season, we've talked about it so many times. It was issues on the defense and special teams that really held this team back. And really, it was the offense that kept that team in a lot of games last year that they probably should have won. There's a reason why there's a new defensive coordinator and a new special teams coordinator in Cleveland. Is because those two units underperformed, and those two units cost the Browns some wins that would have, we'd be having a far different conversation if this team was 9-8 a year ago versus 7-10.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing is the fact that he was able to do that with Baker Mayfield with a messed up left labrum, Jacoby Brissett for 11 games, and Deshaun Watson for the final. It's a credit to his offensive scheme that they were able to score the points they were. This from Pro Football Focus, and we've talked about this before. Wide receivers primed for a bigger role in 2023, and you see the list. Wilson, Ridley, Elijah Moore on that list. Traylon Burks, Sky Moore, Isaiah Hodgkins. But, again, Elijah Moore, there's a reason that they kind of targeted him. And he's going to be a guy that Kevin Stefanski gets the ball in his hand in space. And Browns have not had that in a while.
Yeah, they haven't had a guy who could just make those big plays out of nothing, that anytime, you throw the football towards him, he's got a chance to break a big play because he's got incredible speed. He's so tough to stop in the open field, just incredibly athletic. And I mean, we know what they have. We've seen what they have in Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones. They're both very good receivers in their roles. Cooper is an extremely talented route runner. Peoples-Jones is so good at contested catches. He's extremely athletic with a strong frame, but neither of them are really field stretchers. Elijah Moore is a field stretcher, and I think what hurt him again is the fact, who's throwing in the football in New York the first 2 seasons. And, to answer that question, all you have to do is, understand that there's a reason they traded for Aaron Rodgers instead of sticking with Zach Wilson for a 3rd season. And, coming to Cleveland with what should be much better quarterback play, a more defined role. He's not going to be the number 1 guy like he might have been with the Jets, but I think, with Kevin Stefanski and the offense he can create and putting guys in some good positions to be successful. I think with Deshaun Watson, the way his game is set up where he can throw the deep ball very well, you have Elijah Moore who can stretch the field deep, seems like a pretty good fit. And yeah, I think he's got a chance to really, show people why he was a high 2nd round pick.
All right, this is a tweet from Mac. We use him quite often. David Njoku last season ranks among tight ends. He was 8th in yards after catch, 341 yards, 54% of his total receiving yards. 8th in first downs with 36, tied for 12th in contested catches. I would expect those numbers to go up. I don't think the one thing, I was complimentary of Kevin Stefanski's offense. I don't think he's figured out how to unlock all of the talent that he has in David Njoku. I think he can be among the top 4 or 5 tight ends in the NFL. I think he's that good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's still got plenty of his prime left. I mean, like you said, he just turned 27 years old today, so been in the league a long time, obviously, but I think this could be the first year where you look at, David Njoku, and he's going to have a chance to play in a more pass-happy offense. Just pulling up the numbers right now, the number of pass attempts the Browns had this season. Last season, 22nd in the league in passing attempts. You can understand why, because Jacoby Brissett was the quarterback for those first 11 games, why they weren't throwing the football that much. David Njoku still had 80 targets last season. You would imagine if that number ticks up more, if they're throwing 30 to 40 times every single game with Deshaun Watson, that even though there's going to be more receivers to throw the football to, they're going to probably go in more open receiver sets, more 3s, 4s, maybe even 5s, potentially with Watson a quarterback. You would imagine it's more targets for everybody, just going to be a lower percentage target share. So you would imagine even though Njoku might have a smaller share of passes thrown his way, he should get more chances thrown his way, just because they're going to probably throw the football more than they have in the last couple of years.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. All right, before we go to break again, AFC North secondaries ranked, and we're going to go from worst to first. This is from Dog Pound Daily. They go with the Bengals, and you see Taylor Britt, Awuzie, Mike Hilton's pretty good. Scott, Hill, Battle. Remember, they lost Von Bell and Jesse Bates. Number 3, they go Steelers, Joey Porter Jr., a rookie, Wallace, Patrick Pearson, getting a little long in the tooth. Fitzpatrick is a stud. Ravens, they go as number 2, Rock Yassin, Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, Marcus Wood, Kyle Hamilton. That is a really strong group. They rank the Browns number 1, and it's hard to argue. Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome, Juan Thornhill, Rodney McLeod, Grant Delpit. That is deep. That is strong. And when you look at those rankings, I think people are giving the Bengals a pass. They're going to miss Jesse Bates and Von Bell. They just are.
No question about it. I mean, those are two quality starting safeties in the NFL. I mean, when those guys go out for big money contracts, there's no other way to sugarcoat it. It's just, you're going to have to hope that you hit on some, really good young draft picks at safety. Obviously, Dax Hill was a former first-round pick. They just drafted Jordan Battle in the 3rd round, who I like Jordan Battle. I think he's got a chance to be a pretty good safety. These guys are just unproven in Cincinnati, and I think that's going to be the biggest question going forward for the Bengals. But when you look at the Browns, number one, it speaks to the job Andrew Berry's done evaluating, secondary talent and getting some of these guys in. I mean, you look at Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome, Grant Delpit. They've drafted those guys. He's drafted all 3 of those guys. Denzel Ward, came in before Andrew Berry was the GM. So 4 of those 6 guys that you mentioned are draft picks. And we've seen so much, how the Browns have struggled because they weren't able to draft good talent. You look at this list of guys, they've drafted 2/3 of these guys. So that tells you they've done a very good job identifying good players at that position and, drafting and developing those guys. And in this division, in this conference, with the quarterbacks you got to play against, you got to be able to have guys who can cover. We know the Browns have a very good 1-2-3 combination at corner, however they want to line up, whichever one of the 3 goes into the slot. The question is going to be, how good can Grant Delpit be, going into the final year of his rookie deal? What kind of, veteran presence does Juan Thornhill and Rodney McLeod provide? But, this is a secondary that should be easily as good as any in this division. I think there's a pretty decent gap to me between 1 and 2. I mean, I love Marlon Humphrey. He's one of the best corners in the NFL. Kyle Hamilton had a very good rookie season for Baltimore. I just have questions, outside of Humphrey. Rocky Sin's solid, but there's questions I think that need to be answered after those 2 guys as far as depth, across the rest of that secondary, because, when they got some guys were injured, teams were starting to throw them a little more, especially, a couple of years ago.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take one more timeout. Sports4CLE, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. This is from Touchdown Wire, 2023 NFL Power Rankings Training Camp Edition. Chiefs 1, Eagles 2, Bills 3, Bengals 4. Hard to argue with those. They go with the Ravens at 11. They have the Browns at 16. They have the Bengals 4. They have the Vikings at 12. The Seahawks at 13. The Lions at 14. The Giants at 15, and the Steelers at 18. It says there's plenty of talent on Cleveland's team, solid coaching staff that seems to be right on the edge of putting everything together, excellent rushing attack, an improved defense. The Browns could find themselves in the playoffs. I'm not sure how people are evaluating. Quarterback play is hugely important. Daniel Jones had a nice year. Let's see him do it again. Jared Goff had a nice year. Let's see him do it again. Geno Smith came back out of nowhere. Let's see him do it. I'd much rather take my chances with Deshaun Watson coming back than any of those guys repeating their seasons. Much more.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this list, 11 through 15. You can make arguments of the Browns being better than all of those teams. I mean, you can make a strong argument, I think, for the Browns being the second best team in the division right behind the Bengals. I mean, the Ravens obviously have a very talented defense. We know how good they are. We're going to have to wait to find out what Lamar Jackson looks like in Todd Monken's offense. And, if they've been able to find the receiver that they've been looking for to give Lamar Jackson an elite talented weapon that he really has never had in the passing game, with the exception of Mark Andrews. But, outside of him, even just looking up at, 12 through 15, I think, Deshaun Watson should be better than all those guys. The Detroit Lions are the it team. I get that. And, there's a lot of reason that they are the it team because, they were great at the end of last season. They kept the Packers out of the playoffs. In that last game on Sunday Night Football, Everybody loves Dan Campbell. He's fun. There's just a lot of good things to like about the Detroit Lions, but I don't think they're there quite yet. And, the Giants, I think they're due for a step back. The Vikings seem like they're taking steps back. And I mean, how much can you really trust that Geno Smith is going to do that again after, a breakout 2022 season? We've seen so many quarterbacks have one great year and then kind of fall off. The first one that comes to mind, I think, is Ryan Fitzpatrick with the Chiefs. I'm trying to think it was 2015 when they missed the playoffs, I believe, in the last game of the regular season, if I remember correctly. So when you look at Deshaun Watson, he has a proven track record of success. Yeah, he didn't play well last year, but he hadn't played in almost 2 years prior to, when he came back. So of course he was going to struggle. Getting used to the NFL speed again, working in a new system, working with new receivers, all those different things kind of, combined together and really made things tough for him. Now, it seems like there's just a focus on football for Deshaun Watson. I think, it seems like nationally there's kind of a wait and see mentality with this team. I can understand that, but putting this team behind some of those other teams just based on quarterback play is a little bit of a question to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. 1 year quarterback Derek Anderson popped into my mind. The year the Browns went to the playoffs, he was phenomenal. All right, take a look at this. Myles Garrett out at Summer League, and does this mean that he has unretired? Probably not, but out there having some fun and, again, shown how athletic he is. Myles Garrett hanging out in Vegas from the Summer League.
We get him and Mac McClung in the dunk contest together. I mean, who wouldn't want to watch that? But I mean, it's it's another reminder just the amazing athlete Myles Garrett is. I mean, we know he's an incredible athlete, 6'4", 270 plus pounds, just unbelievable athleticism. That's why he went first overall back in 2017. You always wonder how the coaches feel when they see, Myles Garrett dunking in all those situations, because especially, with what happened to him at the Pro Bowl games when he kind of had that injury that, I think a lot of Browns fans were worried about. Thankfully for the Browns, it really turned out to be minor. So it's good to see, that wasn't that much of an issue. But, we all know Myles Garrett's athletic. I mean, who knows? He could just show up at a dunk contest one day and still do pretty well. I think we'd love to see that. I mean, like Zion Williamson is 4 inches taller than Myles Garrett, similar weight, but he can dunk like crazy. I'd love to see those two kind of try to do a dunk contest together. That'd be great.
All right, before I let you go, we're going to head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one about the Cavs and basketball.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for taking my question. We don't have a whole lot of 6'9", 6'10" that can shoot from the outside. And I was thinking about Bobo. Wouldn't that be an excellent addition? Even if he just give you 10 to 15 or 20 minutes off the bench. At least he's long. He can disrupt shots. He would be a beautiful addition. Hopefully the Cavs can, because he will get picked up. And I don't know what the contract is, but I know it's like low minimum. They pick that guy up. That'll be a great addition to the Cavs. Hopefully that does happen. Thanks again for taking my call and right now.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. So, Bol is 7'2", 220 pounds. Now, the Cavs did make a trade. They traded for Damian Jones, 6'11", 245. Played for the Jazz and the Lakers. Just gave up cash to get him to the Jazz. Averaged 3.5 points, 3 rebounds, 11.6 minutes a game, 41 games. So, to the caller's point, they do need some size. The other thing they need is they need Evan Mobley to get stronger. And keep in mind, Evan Mobley's 21. So he's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. I don't know if Bol, I don't dislike him, but I think they think they address that with Damian Jones.
If you were looking for another big, I don't know if Bol would be the right choice, just because, he's still so young. He still has a way to go with his development. And, given the fact that the Orlando Magic kind of moved on from him, I know they're in a pretty good spot with a rebuild. They're coming along nicely, and they might have a chance to really contend for a play-in spot as early as this season. For them to kind of move on from Bol tells you a little something. Maybe he still needs a little work before you could put him on a team of this caliber. Now, if you're looking for another big, I mean, a name I've seen people suggest on Twitter, for a low price is Christian Wood. Played last season with the Mavericks, 16.6 points, shot 37.6% from three on about 4.2 attempts a game. Not a very good defender, but with this team, with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, you don't necessarily need good defenders. You need a stretch four, and this is a guy who could certainly space the floor. As we saw, a huge issue for the Cavs in that series against the Knicks. They couldn't stretch the floor. They didn't have guys who can make the open threes. Damian Jones, I think he's, a solid bench big. I think he's maybe no better than maybe your fourth big, probably should be, maybe kind of similar to what they got out of Robin Lopez last season. I think if they're able to get Christian Wood for a cheap contract, give him a 1-year trial as a stretch four, I think he's got a lot of tools to bring, because he has that size. And in addition, you don't have to just rely on George Niang being a stretch four. You could have Christian Wood kind of fill that role. So two bigger guys who can space the floor and open things up for Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, and, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell when they're trying to drive the basket. I think spacing and shooting has been a clear emphasis of the offseason for Kobe Altman. I don't know if they would go with Christian Wood, but he's a guy I like. And, for this particular role, it would be a smart decision if they were able to pull it off.
Tim Bielik, as always, appreciate the time and the insight. Good stuff, Tim. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out, Plain Dealer, as well as cleveland.com. That's all the time we have on this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.